Hi, it's Ileana, and today we're going to cover the remote viewing of the Lockheed Martin anti-gravity experiments. And this remote viewing was done originally on February 22nd, 2023. And it's being released because there's interesting corroborating evidence of what recently Michael Herrera, who's a former Marine, had disclosed on the Sean Ryan show. So we're going to link up how this anti-gravity experiments that were done by Lockheed Martin is now using that technology in reverse engineered crafts in 2009 in what Mr. Herrera had witnessed. So Lockheed Martin Skunk Works anti-gravity flight propulsion experiments that were conducted on Earth at one of their two manufacturing facilities that exists on Earth. Note, background history of facilities. Lockheed Martin Aeronautics is based in Marietta, Georgia, and Palmdale, California. Palmdale is home to the Advanced Development Programs, ADP, informally known as the Skunk Works. And I think this anti-gravity experimentation that was done in the 1970s, what the remote viewing shows was done at Skunk Works. So there's various sub-assemblies which are produced at locations in Florida, Mississippi, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. Located in Troy, Alabama, Lockheed Martin's Pike County Operations Facility is a manufacturing final assembly test and storage operation for many of the missile programs supported by Lockheed Martin Missiles and Fire Control, MFC. The site has 4,000 acres of land with 52 buildings. The facility's nearly 600 employees support final assembly of MFC missiles, including Javelin, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, THAAD missile, the Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff missile, JASMINE, and air-to-ground missiles. It also manufactures missiles and hardware for a variety of development programs. Since it was first established, nearly 190,000 missiles have been produced at the site. Lockheed also has two facilities located in Huntsville, Alabama, where they work on the hypersonics projects and space engineering projects and programs. This facility is involved with diversified projects in the fields of military, so in the fields of military space, telecommunications, biotechnology, and other diversified manufacturing programs. The second facility is the Lockheed Martin Space working on satellite projects and government contracts for commercial customers. Lockheed Martin is an aerospace company. It is a corporation, an aerospace corporation. So they have a lot of contracts with the government, and I think they also have contracts with black covert groups, secret contracts off the books that the government, US government, might not even fully understand or realize what Lockheed has been doing since the 1970s and earlier 1950s. Think of Ben Rich. He was the top boss at Lockheed Martin. He ran the Skunk Works program. And before he died, he said, anything you can think of, we've already made, and we've been out to space, and we've taken humans off-world and gone to other places in this universe. So they had mastered anti-gravity quite a while ago. They had mastered gravitational propulsion systems since the 1950s. Think 1954 and onwards. So Ben Rich had spoken about what Lockheed Martin was doing before he passed away. Personally, for myself, I usually like to look at things from a perspective of what can I remote view? I don't know what Lockheed Martin was doing. I don't know what experiments they were working on. So for me, I understand different anti-gravity crafts from what space programs have done. That's what I know. That's where my knowledge base is. So I guess when I was remote viewing anything about Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, for me it was about, are there any exotic crafts? Are there any exotic anti-gravity propulsion systems? Any experiments? Those were just kind of the key words. Also, I know that Lockheed Martin Skunk Works has a lot of different files and filing systems and information about anti-gravity, levitation, propulsion experiments. I just had a hunch that they keep all that stuff. They keep all that stuff well documented. And there had to have been engineers working on this stuff. So in my remote viewing, where the remote viewing took me was in Lockheed Martin's files and experiments of anti-gravity, levitation, propulsion systems, torsion fields, electromagnetic devices, and various crafts. Tic-tac shaped huge crafts. That's where the remote viewing took me in their filing systems. And two things came out that stood out the most. So the first Lockheed Martin Skunk Works anti-gravity light propulsion experiment was with the 3 spinning disk drives having null field capacitors. There was a torsion field with adjustments for creating stable fusion drives. The null field capacitors had magnetic fields making the metallic disks spin with stacked velocities. The null field capacitors had energy rods between them for stable energy flow. This technology looks to be experiments with magnetism. Some UFOs captured on video have looked like spinning tops, and this experiment seems similar to that. Inertial impact array to support anti-gravity conductivity. Spin systems for the floating disks in motion. Fusion stabilization capacity system monitoring the spin cycles and gravity motion frequencies of the disk drives. Under the inertial impact array is the power-up station with the electrical charges and the tuning states being monitored for the whole platform. The 3 spinning disk metallic plates are stacked as 3 floating sections, and between these sections there is the oscillating vibration of frequency reaching the spinning disks. These are the anti-gravity experiments for the lift thrust capacity and anti-gravity solid states holding stable matter for every generation to gravitate both objects and crafts. The Lockheed Martin Skunk Works projects with anti-gravity technology experiments were being conducted between the years of 1974 to 1978. And this is what this looks like with these disk platforms floating one above the other in stacked formation with this energy generation array system creating the anti-gravity levitation experiments. And these were huge. This was in a huge room in a lab facility in the Skunk Works division. So I would say the size of 2 football fields or even more in terms of how big this array system is in these discs. And it's a platform. It looks like a platform. It's disc-shaped circular platforms. This could be for spacecraft design. This could be just anti-gravity levitation experimentation to see how it works. I couldn't quite place what this is for. So for me, it seemed incomplete. Like this is for some kind of a project or a design for some kind of a functionality. But these were the beginning of these experiments. So the functionality, they figured out how to levitate it, how to float it. But what else do you do with these platforms? How do you use them? So that was the question. I never quite figured out what the use factors were for these platforms. What were they designed to do? Michael Herrera revealed that recently on a July 17th show with Sean Ryan, that these particular platforms do levitate. Their anti-gravity tech that are connected with the reverse engineered spacecrafts that Lockheed Martin had designed, octagonal crafts, and that these platforms are connected by electromagnetic magnetism and torsion fields to the bottom of the craft. And these disc platforms, also circular octagonal shape, just like the craft, they lower and they can load supplies onto these platforms. Then they lift back up, connect to the craft, and take off. So it's for loading supplies, it's for loading different things onto these platforms with the magnetic torsion fields that levitate this. So there's no type of any hookup. There's no rails, nothing. This levitates. These platforms load supplies. You can load cargo, you can load different types of machinery on them, you can load supplies, you can load vehicles, and it goes up. There's no ramp system. There's no connection. This is the platform ramp. And then it floats up to the craft, reconnects with the craft, and lifts off and goes where it needs to go. So that's what Michael Herrera had witnessed in 2009 in Indonesia, when he was sent with the Marines on a mission to bring supplies to Indonesians when the Sumatra earthquake happened, 7.6 on the Richter scale. And there was this off-the-books military operation who were loading circular type of crates onto these platforms with cargo vehicles. And what was in these crates were living bodies of humans. Human trafficking. Probably men, women, children, psionics, people with psionic abilities for human experimentation projects and remote viewing projects connected to CIA Stargate program, stuff like that. That's what was in the 4 crates that he saw with his 6 team of Marines who had separated from the other units delivering the aid supplies. And they had gone off, this was somewhat in the jungle, they had gone on and seen this octagonal craft hovering and these crates being unloaded from vehicles onto these spinning, floating platforms. And even Michael Herrera said himself that he thought the craft was reverse engineered and was Lockheed Martin technology. And I think those platforms that I had remote viewed are Lockheed Martin Skunk Works technology, because the description that Michael Herrera gave matches up exactly to this remote viewing that I had done all the way in February 2023. So it's looks like a match. And again, I had also remote viewed Lockheed Martin Skunk Works Exotic Technology Craft, February 23, 2023. Lockheed Martin Skunk Works medium-sized shuttle bus craft. The shuttle bus craft was built by Lockheed Martin Skunk Works division in 2000. On the exterior, the craft appears smaller because of the warp bubble field that is surrounding it. The actual craft is much bigger inside than what it looks like on the outside. Seamless craft construction without any nuts or bolts, seams connecting the craft together, as is done in standard mechanical plane manufacturing. As well, there are no wingspans on the shuttle bus craft. There are artificially created warp bubble fields around the shuttle bus craft to shield the craft from detection, from radiation. There's a cloaking system and the craft can travel in hyperspace. So the warp bubble, the bubble field, also prevents radiation, and it nullifies the radiation from reaching the occupants inside the craft, so they're not radiated by external radiation forces. That's why they can be inside the craft at hyper inertia speeds, at high velocity speeds. They're not going to be crushed. They're not going to be taken over by radiation. That's what makes these crafts hyperspace and interspace, able to travel in interspace and outer space. The shuttle bus craft has a large viewing deck within the craft. There are stand-up and sitting work consoles and also crew seating areas. Behind the seating areas, there are other stand-up work consoles. In the middle of the shuttle bus craft, suspended in the ceilings, is the radiation buffer system to cancel out any forms of radiation frequencies that might accumulate during the high G-force velocities when the craft is traveling. The buffer system will collect any radiation and recycle it, nullifying it completely while the craft is traveling, so the occupants are not exposed to radiation or high G-forces. Beyond the buffer system, there is passenger cabins and crew cabins, as well as separate seating arrangements in the middle of the shuttle bus craft. The shuttle bus craft can hover above water and fly in hydroglide mode under the water. In the back of the shuttle bus craft, there is the main electromagnetic propulsion system with a warp drive nacelle, one of the larger sets. As well, there is a secondary nacelle power system behind the first larger nacelle casing. In addition, behind the two nacelles is the power supply backup propulsion system run on electromagnetic charging systems. So think of Tic Tac, what the various pilots had seen off Catalina in California when they were with their battle groups in the Navy fleets, 2004, 2017. Think of the gimbals, the Tic Tacs. This is the larger version of that. It's the Airbus Lockheed Martin shuttle bus craft. Cylindrical, large craft. That's what this is. And it often looks like silver, made out of silver metallic substance, or white. It has a warp bubble around it. That's what their typical Airbus shuttle bus crafts are. They could load supplies, they can be transferring people, manned crews. The smaller ones, they're remote controlled. They're advanced drone systems. But these bigger shuttle bus, Airbus crafts, they're manned with crews. They're large. Think of the size of a football or two football fields. It's a large craft, and it's cloaked. It has a warp bubble field around it, and it has a cloaking system. So you might not necessarily always see it flying around. And it's created as all one craft. I think it's probably 3D printed as one craft because there's no nuts and bolts and seams on the outside. And it can go at fast speeds and velocities. So 3D printing has come a long way. You don't need to create separate parts to put a craft together. You build it, you produce it as one. So it's a total designed, seamless craft. And it doesn't need wings, it doesn't need fuel, it doesn't need gas or oil to propel it to fly. It's on electromagnetic propulsion systems. That's how it functions. And this is discussing the anti-gravity spinning levitational platforms and stasis pod crates, what Michael Herrera had witnessed. And I'm referring to the remote viewing again and to explain how this is connected. So on July 17th, 2023, I was listening to the Michael Herrera testimony where he was describing seeing a floating platform beneath the reverse-engineered UAP in Indonesia. And I saw similar floating circular platforms in the Lockheed Martin levitation experiments from the 1970s that came out of the remote viewing sessions. Michael had been told that Lockheed Martin produces reverse-engineered crafts that are circular or cylindrical in shape. That's true. They do. The remote viewing shows it. So I had looked at that levitational platform system from the remote viewing with the spinning discs, metallic plates stacked one between the other with null field capacitors to levitate them. I had sort of reverse engineered this design to see what makes it work further. So I totally took apart the remote viewing schematics and was wanting to see what these electromagnetic frequencies are, what it's doing, and why is it so huge. And it's huge because of graviton energy, energy powering these systems up. So when you take it apart, it's energy, it's power, it's conduction, convection, conduction. There's a lot of frequency and energy being conducted here with null fields. When you take that whole remote viewing apart, it shows you much more than what's on the outside of the system. So it's like graviton torsion fields emitting huge energy sources that lift these levitating anti-gravity platforms or disk plates to transport supplies onto the floating crafts that hover above them. This seems to explain what Lockheed Martin was doing, experimenting with the anti-gravity testing of those floating disk platforms. It was to make transportation platforms for crafts to transport items with certain types of graviton fields and electromagnetic torsion lift mechanisms to allow the platforms to hover in the air and with magnetic fields to reconnect with the crafts when the loading of the supplies is completed, with the platform raising up and reattaching to the ship or ships. In terms of the stasis pod cylindrical crates that Michael was describing seeing during the human trafficking happening in the 2009 Black Ops operation in Indonesia, after the earthquake disaster of the 7.6 Richter scale earthquake. So those 8 to 10 feet crates are the normal standard sizes for holding human bodies and extraterrestrial bodies that Planetary Corp uses in the cybernetics labs on the Mars bases to ship out human psionics in the specialty exotic extraterrestrials with complex DNA. They get put in the stasis pod crates and are shipped off wherever the deliveries needed to go. I was responsible for some of that work. I only needed the genomic structures and the whole genome scans with DNA profiles of all the bodies to study their molecular and biological features through the holographic rendering of the bodies to build up profiles. I did not need the bodies themselves for the type of genetics projects that I worked on, creating the human ET hybrids. I collected just genetics, genomes, and profiling DNA to create structures of these bodies to study the molecular and biological features, but I did not need the bodies for the type of work I did. So when I had remote viewed similar operations happening in Antarctica with the stasis pod coffins in which the 10 feet tall ETs were being shipped, it makes sense in what Michael was referring to have seen back in the jungles of Indonesia in the illegal 2009 trafficking of the Black Ops operation, human trafficking. There is a huge cloning center and research facility in Antarctica that ships humans and extraterrestrials' bodies in the stasis pod coffins to other medical research facilities that are kept in secret in black site facilities all over Earth in remote locations around the world. The exotic ET bodies in the stasis pods that came from the Planetary Corporation's cybernetics labs on Mars were received by the DUMS Earth Medical Laboratories and a medical scientist by the initials of ES. Got to study the various extraterrestrials' biological matter that planetary corporations had bagged and tagged, then shipped off to Earth in secret laboratories that study these beings and extract the molecular and biological components, as well as chemicals from the ET bodies to make new medications for regenerative purposes, hybridization, etc. And this is what the octagonal craft looks like, probably made by Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, that Michael Herrera was talking about, and the crates being shipped to the craft to be loaded on that anti-gravity platform, reconnect to the craft and take off. Initially, Michael Herrera thought that what was inside these crates were either weapons or drugs, but it wasn't. He was later told by a scientist who works in these labs, similar labs with human experiments, probably cloning and psionics projects of humans, children, women, men, whoever fits the genetic profiles with extreme psionic abilities, they're kidnapped, taken, trafficked into these underground DUMS facilities, medical research facilities on Earth. They're transferred there, and they're either studied for how their abilities work, or they're put into these psionics projects for the CIA and other operations. I've done hypnosis with SSP assets who remember being in psionics projects. One in particular I know who we did a lot of hypnosis and found out that they were in these types of projects, but they hadn't been kidnapped. They were put through military operations in psionics projects for the CIA and other three-letter agencies' operations doing remote viewing projects with their psionics abilities to prevent terrorism attacks in foreign countries attacking the US. There was even time travel projects that were involved in that. So I did a lot of work with a person who was in this type of a program. They had not been trafficked, but we have descriptions of these programs. So Michael Herrera describes that the craft was rotating in a clockwise motion while changing colors. It was spinning. It had an audible hum to it, like the sound of a transformer or a guitar amp. It was an octagonal shape with a pyramid at the top of it that was black. This is what Herrera had said. And that happened in Indonesia, 2009, in an illegal black ops program. And the soldiers who were conducting this program, it was off books. They probably were ex-military, or even if they were current military, it's a black ops operation, not a legal one, off the books. They were dressed in black uniforms, they were armed, they had weapons, rifles, guns, and Michael Herrera and his team were held at gunpoint and threatened that they would be killed if they talked about any of this or disclosed this. So Michael Herrera kept this information for 14 years to himself. Now he's disclosing it because these operations and the human trafficking needs to stop. I'm disclosing it because what I know also needs to be disclosed. That Lockheed Martin has been involved with operations of reverse engineering non-human extraterrestrial crafts and then using this technology in illegal operations with these anti-gravity platform systems to sell that technology, trade it to these covert operational groups that do human trafficking of people for psionics projects, for organ harvesting, for cloning operations and human experiments to make super soldiers. Probably biological human cyborgs as well, for military operations on planet and off planet. This is a reality that needs to be disclosed and it needs to be stopped. These illegal operations need to cease and stop. Humans are not for trafficking. Extraterrestrials are not for trafficking and experimentation. They're living beings who deserve to not be put in any of this program stuff that's illegal, period. Thank you so much, and namaste.